Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is the Sunday show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time program explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I'm Natalia Humenyuk. OSCE Special Monitoring Mission patrol draw on mine. 1 patrol member is killed, 2 more injured. Ukraine arrests another high-profile official in Anti-Corruption Purge. The International Court of Justice in The Hague ruling on Ukraine's case against Russia explained in this program, and the study of the individual stances and policies of the European Union 28 country members on Russian aggression. More to follow. And I encourage you to go to our webpage to read our analysis, to watch the full version of our interviews and reports. And as the webpage address is en.hromadske.ua, and you can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. You search Hromadske International and you will see that our team is working for you 24/7. I'll be back in a second. And tragic news from the occupied Luhansk region. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission patrol had been killed in a car. As we know, that was a landmine. 2 more personalities are in the hospital. The patrol was consisting of 6 members and 2 armored vehicles. What we know, the attack has happened in the vicinity of the settlement of Prishib. It's an area which is not controlled by the Ukrainian government. It's controlled by the separatists of the so-called Luhansk People Republic. Let's see, we will follow this development. It's the 3rd high-profile arrest of the Ukrainian official in Anti-Corruption Purge. Ukrainian Member of Parliament Mykola Martynenko was detained on the charge of looting more than $17 million. The suspected Martynenko was handed over to detectives from the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. He is the closest associate to the former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. The Swiss prosecutor's office suspects Martynenko guilty of corruption during back to 2015. Ukrainian law enforcement are also now looking into these accusations. So we are following this court case and we will explain you why it's significant. And before, please watch our report from the court.
У суді на захист Мартиненка встигли з'явитися 15 народних депутатів та 4 міністри, усі від Народного фронту. Періодично кожен із них висловлював невдоволення суддею Бобровником, якому випала доля обирати запобіжний захід обом колишнім посадовцям.
Система обрала чомусь наперед одіозного суддю Бобровника, який абсолютно є керованим за допомогою НАБУ.
Все мы знаем. И знает сторона защиты, и знаю я персонально, и знают прокуроры. Прекрасно знают. То есть по суде есть уголовное производство.
Зрештою, суддя ухвалив рішення відпустити Мартиненка на поруки депутатів та міністрів.
Ганьба корумпованим суддям! Ганьба! Не получається!
Прокурори пообіцяли оскаржити рішення суду.
На жаль, той процес, який вчора почався, фактично було легалізовано тиск на суд як спосіб захисту. Тиск на суд, погрози – це фактично зараз нова форма захисту. Ми не можемо з цим погодитися. Якби не було всіх оцих вчорашніх викриків, там, що погроз, що посадять Бобровника і так далі, тому інше, ми погодились би.
Мартиненка підозрюють у створенні злочинної організації та розтраті грошей і майна шляхом зловживання службовим становищем. Попри серйозні звинувачення, Мартиненко впродовж усього засідання виглядав напрочуд веселим. А після оголошення вироку запевнив, тікати з України, мовляв, не збирається.
Перше, я нікуди не збираюсь. Дуже дякую всім, хто взяв мене на поруки. І вам обіцяю, що постійно буду знаходитись на місці. Друге питання. Я готовий йти в суд по всім фактам, які назвали прокурори, і доводити свою невинність в цих всіх питаннях. Вважаю, що я до цієї кримінальної справи відношення не маю. Не те, що я не винний, і відношення просто не маю до цієї кримінальної справи.
Пізніше суд відпустив на поруку і другого фігуранта цієї справи – Сергія Перелому. Це колишній голова Одеського припортового заводу і нині діючий заступник голови НАК «Нафтогаз». Прокурори підозрюють його у співучасті до привласнення грошей Східного ГЗК. Обвинувальний акт у справі посадовців в антикорупційній прокуратурі обіцяють передати в суд впродовж наступних 2 місяців. Мартиненкові загрожує до 12 років в'язниці.
And to go into details, please read our explainer on our webpage. There you will know all the details why this case is significant and what you need to know. That's a bit of a complex story. But to elaborate more in our studio and explain also the political impact of that, we have Daria Kalinyuk, who is an executive director of the Independent Anti-Corruption Action Center. Dasha, thanks a lot for coming. Just really explain our audience, why this case is significant. It is third. We can speak about the third of this level official. We could say from the current political elite, not the former political elite. So what we need to know about that?
Well, we might need to know political side of the case and legal side of the case. I will probably start with the political. So who is Martynenko and why it's a very significant story to have Martynenko suspect in corruption. Martynenko used to be the head of the Energy Committee in Parliament. He was head of this committee for ages, even before Poroshenko, when Yanukovych was in power. And Martynenko now remains to be, according to different sources, a key sponsor of Narodny Front party. This is the second largest faction in Ukrainian parliament, which is headed by Arseniy Yatsenyuk, the former prime minister of Ukraine. So Martynenko is a very influential politician. While he is now not a member of parliament, he still has a lot of political influence. And his business, of course, is very linked to his political influence. What is the business of Martynenko? The business of Martynenko is simply control our Ukrainian state-owned companies. One of such companies is Energatom. This is a Ukrainian monopoly, which is state-owned and which is managing all Ukrainian nuclear power plants. We have such kind of 4 huge power plants. And Martynenko lobbied for a manager for this state-owned company who is under his influence and control. And having his own manager, he can influence how the money on Energatom are being spent. And usually such how money are being embezzled through state-owned company. State-owned company purchases, for example, some equipment. This is very unique equipment for nuclear power plants. For every citizen, you would not understand what is the market price for such kind of equipment. But at the end, the state company would purchase the equipment for much higher price than the real market price. And the difference of the price is remaining in the hands of Martynenko through a set of offshore companies. And this is what happened in investigation where NABU brought suspicion against Martynenko. It's a similar case, not with Energatom, but also a state-owned company, which is related to the energy, which has to produce uranium. Uranium is the source, as I understand, to feed nuclear power plants. And this is the part of Ukrainian energy security strategy from Russia to produce and extract its own uranium.
And Dasha, we have this very sophisticated scheme of funds embezzlement of the
It looks
the companies.
sophisticated.
Yeah, it looks sophisticated, and you can follow it on Twitter if you really want to go in the details. National Anti-Corruption Bureau had produced it. So really, what is the legal side of the story?
Yeah, and I actually transferred from political to legal side. The legal side is that in the state-owned company, which has to produce uranium and sell it to Ukrainian Energatom and feed nuclear power plants, the state-owned company didn't extract and didn't produce uranium, but instead of that bought it from shell companies. And in this episode, which was investigated by NABU and brought into court, we see that uranium was bought from Austrian shell company, which was managed from Kiev, whose beneficial owner is Martynenko himself, and which in turn purchased this uranium from Kazakh company. And the price changed into tens of millions of dollars from the moment when Austrian company bought this uranium from Kazakhstan and then sold it to Ukrainian state-owned mining company. Detectives found proof which shows that the difference of this price, which was laundered through a set of shell companies, including in Great Britain, in Panama, and in Austria, ended up in the hands of the family of Martynenko, and the family of Martynenko spent it there abroad. So the case is very interesting because it indicates that, yes, Ukraine is a very corrupt country. Billions and probably millions of hryvnias are being embezzled from the state, but then this money are being laundered through the Western Europe and using a range of shell companies, intermediaries, and Western lawyers.
What was I would say, the public disappointment when the number of the ministers, of the Ukrainian ministers from Narodny Front party, including those who are considered to be reformist, like the Minister for Infrastructure, Milan, or like somebody who are the Minister of Education, have come to support Martynenko and were really accusing the the Anti-Corruption Bureau to be biased, to be politically biased. What is there? How do you see that?
Well, it simply indicates once again how powerful is still Martynenko. While he is not member of the parliament, he influences ministers who became ministers because of the quota of Narodny Front, and he influences a lot of members of the parliament who are representing Narodny Front. What we witnessed in the court is pure political pressure on the court. When members of the parliament come and say that NABU controls the judge, is something that shouldn't happen in the democracy. Yes, actually, I myself don't trust to the Judge Bobrovnik, but it's not how member of the parliament should behave in the court. Come in and threatening judge that, listen, if you will decide and agree with NABU request to arrest him or to issue a big bail for him, we will do something with you. This is something that shouldn't happen if you want fair justice.
The independence of NABU, Anti-Corruption Bureau, is exactly what I would like to ask after we listen to the quote of Nazar Holodnitsky, who is the head of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor Office.
Фактично, державне підприємство, яке не мало права оголошувати конкурс на придбання урану, його провело, виграла фірма австрійська, яка фактично цей уран не видобувала. І гроші після перерахування з державного підприємства «Схід ГЗК» були перераховані на австрійську фірму, яка фактично бенефіціаром якої є наші підозрювані. Тому слідство встановило, доведено експертизою, те, що сума збитків задана державного підприємства, а отже державі, становить більше $17 мільйонів.
So, if a foreigner look at Ukraine who doesn't follow closely, you think like, okay, another fight among new institutions. So really, and to build an independence, we have now a number of the institutions who are supposed to fight corruption in this country. Some of them are, related to the government, some are independent, so it's really sometimes difficult to understand. So you as an anti-corruption activist who are, working for an NGO, with no ties to any of the state bodies, what you would say? To what extent our institutions like NABU, Anti-Corruption Bureau, are really independent, and particularly how this case, what it can prove?
This case proves that the new law enforcement agency, which was built up from scratch, whose director was selected through independent, transparent, competitive procedure, whose detectives were selected through the same very competitive procedure, whose detectives undergo everyone through the polygraph test, is ready to touch untouchable people in Ukraine. Because Martynenko is untouchable person, like Nasirov, another case which we witnessed, right? And we see that NABU is getting mature. Yes, they spent first year on building up the agency from scratch and building up institution, hiring new people. Then the second year they spent on looking for the evidence and building up these cases. And now is the third year when they are giving the results. NABU can't convict alone the person. They can't confiscate alone assets. They need support of anti-corruption prosecutors, and we see now prosecutors who are eager to cooperate with NABU, but still we have unreformed courts.
So it's exactly where we're going. I would like to show that we show the graph showing the other personalities. We have Onyshenko, also the former MP from the Party of Region, who is currently out of the country. He had been accused of being involved in an organized crime which cost the government 3 million hryvnias. It's a bit more than $100,000. He fled Ukraine. As well, we have the case of the Roman Nasirov, who is the state fiscal service chief. And we also can see the numbers. But really, it happened that though there are charges, Nasirov is more or less, he had been bailed, and as well today Martynenko is also bailed. And really there are always concerned that if these people are bailed, they can leave the country or somehow they can avoid the just full court.
Absolutely. Even if Martynenko says that he will not leave the country, the bail doesn't prevent him from influential witnesses. And as he still has very big political influence, he can destroy a case and he can, pressure witnesses who are providing evidence and who are building up the case for NABU. Therefore, it was very strategically important to arrest Martynenko, at least for these 2 months, for which NABU has a time frame to finish the case and present it into the court. And I'm very much disappointed with such a decision of the court. But again, it's not NABU or specialized anti-corruption prosecution fault. It is 15 people who are ministers and members of the parliament, jointly with attorneys of Martynenko, who are coming into the court and who are pressuring the judge and harassing him, who are also harassing NABU and specialized anti-corruption prosecution. And at the end, the judge makes up the decision which can harm the case. So this case gives one more argument and one more reason why in Ukraine we need setup of anti-corruption court, where there will be first judges selected through the very similar transparent and competitive procedure as the procedure of NABU director was, and where we will have additional guarantees of independency of such judges, where we can prevent and somehow protect judges from harassment and from possible political interference and influence. And Ukraine committed to set up such an anti-corruption court. There is already draft law in the parliament, and I expect that Ukrainian parliament will move forward with considering this draft law. And by the way, this is the requirement of the IMF.
So, Daria, thanks a lot for all this explanation. We'll follow the case. It was Daria Kaleniuk, an executive director of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, with us. And the symbol of the Ukrainian corruption was the luxury real estate of former Ukrainian President Yanukovych. And what is interesting, it's based near Kiev. It's still under arrest, and its legal status has not yet been determined. Recently, the court ruled that the transfer of Mezhyhirya from state property to a private company is illegal. Hromadske went there to see how the Mezhyhirya itself has changed in the 3 years since the estate's evolution from presidential residence to the Museum of Corruption.
Їжа, вода та навіть повітря, яким дихав Янукович у Межигір'ї, досліджувалося у високотехнологічній лабораторії. Кожний пристрій тут коштує сотні тисяч доларів, розповідає мікробіолог Тетяна.
Чашка Петрі з відповідним поживним середовищем для відповідного мікроорганізму. Значить, ставиться сюди чашка Петрі, накривається вона таким кришечкою, де вона має отвори. Нажимається кнопочка, втягує відповідний об'єм повітря, який нам потрібний для досліджень. Потім знімається, закривається термостат на інкубацію, і ми бачимо, що в повітрі літає, що росте. Це по мікробіології.
Віктор Янукович здебільшого їв овочі, які вирощували тут, в теплицях Межигір'я.
Унікальність в тому, що в одній теплиці і овочева вся група, і квіткова. В цьому унікальність, в цьому і складність, тому що чим більше асортимент, тим складніше цим всім управляти. Всі вони потребують різного догляду, різних температурних режимів, вологості різної. Команда невелика, 6 чоловік, але всі професіонали. Люди практично без вихідних днів зараз у весняний період працюють.
Поряд з теплицями знаходиться також зоопарк зі славнозвісними страусами. До речі, нещодавно пташине сімейство поповнилося маленькими страусенятами. Але окрім них на території зоопарку переживають також антилопи, лами, віслюки та навіть рідкісні павичі. Резиденція відома парком колекційних авто. Тут зберігається 35 ретро-автомобілів і 7 мотоциклів. Наприклад, ЗІЛ 2009 року. Таких у світі тільки 3. Один у Москві у Володимира Путіна, другий у Астані в Нурсултана Назарбаєва. Третій був у Януковича. Власником колишньої резиденції Януковича є компанія «Танталіт», до якої причетний народний депутат Сергій Клюєв, брат колишнього голови адміністрації Януковича Андрія Клюєва. З 22 лютого 2014 року за Межигір'ям наглядає колишній активіст Євромайдану Денис Тарахкотелик. Він одним з перших зайшов на територію Межигір'я після втечі Януковича.
Я коли зайшов на 4 КПП, де познайомився з начальником УДО, який тут був, єдиний лишився з усього УДО.
Зараз територія Межигір'я відкрита для усіх бажаючих, однак за вхід доведеться заплатити. Юридично це є благодійним внеском для того, щоб територію маєтку можна було утримувати в належному стані, пояснює комендант Межигір'я. За словами Тарахкотелика, держава не виділяє кошти на утримання резиденції. Охорону майна екс-президента тут забезпечують колишні представники самооборони та бійці спецпідрозділу МВС та Нацгвардії. Але дві останні структури юридично тут слідкують за громадським порядком. Загалом у Межигір'ї працюють близько 200 співробітників. За словами коменданта, протягом 3 років у Межигір'ї назбиралося багато побутових проблем.
The International Court of Justice in The Hague has partially granted Ukraine's request for preliminary measures against Russia under the International Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. However, the court said that it wouldn't impose measures ordering Russia to stop funding and equipping pro-Russian separatists as part of the case brought against Moscow by Ukraine. The decision concerned the choice of provisional measures based on claims that Russia supports terrorism in Donbass and ethnic discrimination against Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars in annexed Crimea. Moreover, the ICJ expects Ukraine and Russia to both uphold and implement the Minsk agreement. And we have with us Mykola Gnatovsky, who is one of the best Ukrainian international lawyers, to explain the significance of this case, what it means. So, Mykola, thanks a lot for talking to us. There are always debates in Ukraine. Has Ukraine lost or won in this case? What it all means? How significant is that? Can you elaborate?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, this case is, of course, a case that should be viewed in a broader context of the various efforts by the Ukrainian government to have recourse to various judicial mechanisms that exist in international law. When it comes to the International Court of Justice, the government chose to invoke the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, as well as the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism, for the simple reason that these were the two conventions where Russia has already beforehand agreed to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice in respect of all possible disputes arising from these two conventions. So at this stage, Ukraine requested provisional measures that is a very, very preliminary stage of the proceedings. So at this stage, it is really impossible to speak about winners or losers. Definitely, there might have been a big loss, of course, for Ukraine, should the court decide to strike out these cases and to basically to refuse justice to Ukraine exactly on this stage. This is a rare occasion, but in principle that is not impossible. The court did that in other cases sometimes. So here, of course, as long as the case goes on, we can't say that there are winners or losers. Now, concerning the provisional measures ordered, I think Ukraine can consider it to be a success that the measures ordered under the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, that these measures are quite specific. It is not just a general measure that the parties should refrain from aggravating the dispute or making it more difficult to resolve. This measure also applies to both conventions, and this measure was also ordered by the court. But it's a specific measure concerning the Crimean Tatars, and in particular their representative body, the Mejlis, and also it is a specific measure concerning the education in the Ukrainian language. So it is good that these specific measures have been indeed ordered. As regards the other convention on the financing of terrorism, this convention was very new for the court in the sense that there hasn't been a case directly dealing with the interpretation of this convention. So the court has entered an unknown territory, and the court had to be very careful and very prudent at this stage, before, without prejudging its future decisions, its future judgments on the existence of the jurisdiction of the court, because it is evident that Russia will, of course, submit preliminary objections regarding the jurisdiction, and also possibly, if that stage is successfully passed by Ukraine, then also the court didn't prejudge its further deliberations on the merits of the case. So, in that respect, of course, there are some very useful hints for Ukraine regarding the preparation and the drafting of its memorial for the court. Regarding the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, but also regarding terrorism, because the court has already, in a way, showed how it is going to interpret the definition of terrorism and the definition of financing terrorism that are present in the Convention. And this also requires Ukraine to be very specific and to find good evidence.
That's exactly what I'd like to clarify. So why those claims that Russia supports terrorism in Donbass were not supported? Some people were saying that maybe Ukraine was too ambitious to really, raise that particular issue, but the government has chosen that particular claim. So what it mean? How would you interpret that?
Well, in the first place, the court did not consider any of the claims made by Ukraine on merits. Okay, so this is very important to know. It was just the preliminary measures, whether the court can already, on the basis of what there is before it, in a very limited time, order preliminary measures. And in respect to this convention, the court wasn't in a position to do that, because the situation is indeed very complex. It is not only about terrorism. It's also about an armed conflict, and this is what the Russian agents before the court tried to argue, that this entire situation in the eastern regions of Ukraine, that it falls under the scope of international humanitarian law. Of course it does, but not only international humanitarian law. Acts of terrorism are possible. They can be committed, and unfortunately they are committed in armed conflicts, making it also a specific case that could be raised under this convention. So now for the court, it was too early to judge. And that's why the court decided to be cautious. So this is how I interpret its order.
And finally, to what it all will lead? What is next? What is next?
Well, what is next? The next is the court has to fix now timing for the parties to prepare, for Ukraine to prepare its memorial. That is the main document, the main submission to the court. and then also to the Russian Federation to prepare its counter memorial. So it will take time. It will take, I think, now with a very possible stage of establishing jurisdiction of preliminary objections by the Russian Federation, that only the stage of preliminary objections will take, in my opinion, at least 2 years, maybe 3 years.
And if we go beyond ICJ, then what? What are the other ways that the countries, like Ukraine in this case, can, ask for justice?
Well, Ukraine is already doing that. Ukraine is doing that in the European Court of Human Rights with 5 interstate applications concerning the Russian Federation. Ukraine is already doing it in the arbitral tribunal created under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Ukraine is doing that in various international fora that deal with investment claims. So this is a very complex picture. It is not just the International Court of Justice.
According to ICJ decision, Moscow must halt alleged discrimination against ethnic Tatars in Crimea. But this week we would like to draw your attention to a particular case of the Crimean Tatar, a construction worker who is on hunger strike in Russian prison. This is a case of Ruslan Zaytulayev. He is on the hunger strike from the 4th of April. It's already almost 3 weeks. What is interesting about his case, he is imprisoned already for 2 years and illegally, which is against the international law, humanitarian law. He had been transferred to Rostov-on-Don, that is a Russian town, from Crimea, where he had been convicted already by the North Caucasus District Military Court to 7 years in prison. Though, according to the decision of the appeal court, Ruslan's case is now being reviewed by the North Caucasus District Military Court, and he faces 15 years in prison. This is the very recent development, and at this stage I would like you to watch this video, which has been prepared a bit earlier, 10 days after he had announced his hunger strike. The video is prepared by the Ukrainian activist, though we can confirm the facts in it. And leading human rights and civic organization of Ukraine appealed to the European Union, to the government of Ukraine, to the government of Russia to do something in the case of Ruslan, as they have the reason to believe that his health and life is in danger. Though we also had a chance to listen to his final word in the court recently, you can see and listen to him reading that from his cell.
Свою вину в инкриминируемом мне преступлении за 2 с лишним года я не признал и не признаю. И я надеюсь, что этот факт можно понять любому разумному человеку, потому что грош цена этому обвинительному заключению, где каждый факт и сложный в нем извращен, либо вынужден настолько, что это очевидно даже обычному обывателю. Я увидел на предварительном следствии такое количество нарушений, что просто перестал их записывать и подавать жалобы на действия и бездействие других вышестоящих инстанций.
So you can read more on the persecution of the Crimean Tatars in Russian Federation. There are more than 20 people now in prison. We're covering this issue, and please go there to hromadske.ua. You'll find a lot of stories. These days we are talking a lot and following the French elections. And when this topic is on, from time to time we hear about the Russian intervention in the elections. But how much Kremlin can influence? Is the Russian threat overestimated? What really we can tell about the real influence of Moscow to the elections in various European states? Of course, not just elections, but the public policy. So this week, the next week, the European Values think tank would present in the European Parliament its own study on the policies of all the 28 European Union member states on how they deal with Russia and how the Moscow deals with them. This is a very, very interesting survey, and we are talking to Jakub Janda, who is the deputy head and the deputy director and the head of the Kremlin Watch program on the European Values think tank, who will elaborate more on what we really need to know about this. Jakub, congratulations with the impressive study. And really, there is a general understanding that the Kremlin is trying to interfere the policies of various European states. But what new you have managed to prove with this research, and maybe you wasn't managed to confirm something? What are the main findings? What we need to know? What the public need to know?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Actually, this study is an outcome of several months' work of my colleagues and myself as well. And basically, there are several things which we can take away from it. First, that obviously the EU was able to put together the sanctions against Russia's behavior. But right now, we can see that there are, let's say, 11 countries, which 11 out of those EU 28, which first had the overall experience or knowledge or and expectations of the Russians' aggressive behavior, or that those countries have shifted their policies following the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So those are 11 countries. Let's say we have a small group of 6 countries which, to our understanding, had held the concerned views of the Russian behavior, and that's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, Poland, United Kingdom, and Denmark. So those countries basically knew it all along. So they were warning against Russia's behavior. And then we have another 5 countries, which has, to our understanding, basically shifted their national policies and strategic documents following the Russians' aggression against Ukraine. And that's basically Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, Germany, and Czech Republic. So those are countries which are now basically on the front line of the response to Russian aggression. Every country is different, so we are not saying everybody is the same, but basically this is the core of the European response to Russian aggression. So those are the key countries. Moreover, if we would be more specific looking at the threats coming from Russia, there are 13 countries out of those 28 which are pretty much concerned with Russian disinformation and Russian effort to interfere in European domestic affairs. And those countries, let's say, are taking part in several, let's say, international projects which the EU or NATO is doing on Russian disinformation primarily. But still, at the end, this means that those are, let's say, 11 or, let's say, 13 countries which are the core, which is advocating for more options against the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So, and obviously there are countries which are very much hesitant, or countries which are pretty Kremlin-friendly, as we would say, which are basically helping out Russian foreign policy objectives sometimes. And that's unfortunately, for example, Greece, Italy, or Cyprus.
And what are the particular policies? What is the Russian strategy? What exactly they do?
They do several things, and to put it very simple, Russia tries to divide and conquer. Basically, what we know is that when those EU countries, even smaller countries such as Czech Republic, where I come from, are faced with dealing with Russia bilaterally, so one-to-one, they are obviously very weak. But EU28 can work pretty well if there is a united voice on this. At this moment, we still have a united voice on the sanctions, even though there are countries which are voicing their concerns. We still have the sanctions running and prolonged. But what is Russia basically doing? It tries to provide specific offers or deals to specific countries to lure them on their side, for example. Or we can see disinformation and influence operations, which are trying to do something what we could call a soft regime change. So, for example, trying to help specific candidates in specific countries, let's say now in France, in Germany, in some other countries as well, to help them be elected. And there, Russia expects that those candidates would be, let's say, pretty tolerant to something what Russia calls a sphere of influence.
Jakub, you have written that the game changer in this situation would be the next German government coalition. And as well, these days we are definitely watching closely the elections in France. So the biggest EU countries, so with UK being out already. So what can you elaborate more on particularly those states?
Basically, if you look at France, we could see that France has been very hesitant in supporting Ukraine or being, let's say, open and vocal against Russian aggression. But still, obviously, France supports the sanctions. So that has been the long-term position of France, let's say. But now, with the presidential elections basically happening right now, there is obviously a lot of question mark, because we could have basically a winner who could be basically a Russian Trojan horse. We could really much have, if Marine Le Pen would get elected, which still is a possibility, it would mean that Russia would have its one of the most let's say, vulnerable and good friends in Europe, in an executive office in France, in the presidential palace, which could mean a lot. But there are obviously other candidates which are, I would say, Kremlin friendly as well. Or there are candidates such as Mr. Macron, who could be, I would expect, let's say, he would continue in the current French policy, which basically stands behind the sanctions in a way, even though they criticize them somehow. This, for example, what Mr. Macron is saying in his program as well. But they are more or less pretty silent on the positions which are happening at this moment. So I wouldn't expect big changes if Mr. Macron would get elected. But more important, I would say, or let's say at least of similar importance, are the elections in Germany, as you said. And those are because that's basically everything is open, because on one side there is a possibility that potentially there could be something what we would call a red coalition. So the Social Democrats with Die Linke, which is the post-communist party, which is I would again say a Kremlin Trojan horse, because they simply copy-paste basically anything what Kremlin says. And they, for example, want to get out of NATO as well for Germany, which would be a huge blow if it would happen. I wouldn't expect it would really happen, but this chance is there. And on the other side, we could have the CDU, the current Chancellor Angela Merkel, be in charge. And the question is, with whom she would form the coalition. If again with the Social Democrats, I would expect that the current position of the German government wouldn't be changing much. Or she could do a coalition potentially with other coalition partners if those numbers would add up. And then she could fulfill basically what she really feels about Russia. And that would be a really principled position on every side of the aisle.
And Jakub, so what would be your recommendations, as that's probably the most important things of a policy paper, where to look at, where could be the major concerns, and maybe you'd be more specific also mentioning some particular states?
Yes, basically we are coming up with 7 recommendations. First, we are saying that the aggressiveness of Russia or Russian Federation is probably not going to go away overnight. It will probably stay with us, unfortunately, for quite some time until the regime in Russia implodes on different reasons. So we are saying this is not going to disappear only depending on what's happening in Ukraine. Second, we are saying that basically we should be, we as even smaller countries in Europe, should be focusing on assisting Germany to adopt the position of the prime defender of the liberal international order, which is something what many people are thinking about. German military is pretty much on the right side on this, even having large capacities done in the Baltic states right now. But politically, it's still pretty hard for Germans to really play this role. So I think smaller countries could help out to the Germans on this one slightly. Number 3, we are saying that it's probably not reasonable to expect that some positions of the Kremlin friendlies, like Greece, Italy, or Cyprus, would be moving. Because we have seen quite a lot of atrocities or even crimes from the Russian side in Ukraine or Syria, and those countries like Greece, Italy, and Cyprus has basically didn't change any of their big policies on this. So we are saying basically probably nothing can move them. Number 4 would be basically saying that we should be looking at how Russia uses energy dependence of some European countries and trying to make it even bigger, for example, with Nord Stream 2 project. And that's something what should be looked through not only energy lens, but also from security and intelligence matters, because we can see, for example, Russia trying to lure some of the current or former politicians to work on the Kremlin's behalf, as we have seen, for example, with the former German chancellor. Number 5 would be that we are basically saying that European countries should really stand and basically form their own defense mechanisms against hostile foreign influence, because we could see Russia trying to interfere in indirect elections, and that's probably not going to go away, including disinformation threat. So for this reason, every country needs to seriously look into it. Number 6, we are saying that there are 13 countries which apparently take Russian disinformation pretty seriously, and they should ask Federica Mogherini to reinforce the team she has in her service, because it still has only 11 people. So for this reason, it should be strengthened. And number 7, the last recommendation, is basically saying that at this moment, we are pretty much missing the Polish engagement on this field, because Poles have the capacity, have the history. Everybody understands why they are concerned about Russia's behavior, but because of how the current Polish government is behaving in European institutions and internationally, they are not seen as the legitimate leader at this moment. And I think it's a very pretty much wasted opportunity at this moment, because everybody, let's say, including the Italians, would be understanding or would understand if Poland would be the leader of the countries which are concerned with Russia. But right now it's very tough because of how the Polish government is behaving on so many levels. So that's number 7, that we are saying this would be great if this would change, because that would mean that this pack of countries, of 11 countries at least, could have an informal leader which would be well respected because of history, size, and the regional aspects as well.
Ukraine's neighbor Turkey is split into 2 groups, namely those who are celebrating the victory in the referendum and those who are insisting on a vote recount. Turkey population 51% had voted to change the system from the parliamentary election and become the presidential republic. There were a lot of discussion about the end of the Turkish democracy. But we had a chance to talk to Sercan Çelebi, who is a founder of Vote and Beyond campaign, and explained us why we have the reasons to remain optimistic about the Turkish society.
When you pass something like this that has such a big impact directly on people's lives, 51%, is it really enough? Is 55% enough, you know? When we're talking about constitutions, which are basically a common sort of basis for the society to live together, I would expect a very qualified majority to be deciding these things. So maybe even 60% would put the question legitimacy of the outcome of these elections. So there's that bit with respect to, you know, what percentage would actually be sufficient for the population to say, this is how I would like to be governed. Now, in this election, there was even more than that, right? Even if we were to accept the 51%, the way we came to the 51% actually raises a lot of questions with respect to legitimacy, right? On the one hand, we had the president who, by the Constitution, is supposed to be independent and equidistant to all parties, and he was campaigning for yes, and he was campaigning for a yes using the state resources. You know, the prime minister was campaigning for the yes, all municipalities were campaigning for yes. So on the one hand, you had this huge campaign with a huge budget versus the no part, where there was no organized opposition. It was basically a bunch of organically created random independent movements campaigning, completely at a grassroots level, with very, very limited budgets, right? No media coverage whatsoever, a lot of auto-censorship in the press with respect to campaign. So after this whole process, on the day of the election, there comes the Supreme Electoral Council with this decision that was clearly against the Turkish electoral law, which puts the process into, like the legitimacy of the process, the legitimacy of the outcome, into a lot of doubt. So these two things combined, you know, don't necessarily give me a lot of confidence with respect to the future of this outcome.
At the same time, you know, the comment, especially abroad, you know, it's the especially abroad in the Western media and in Ukrainian as well. You know, you have all the things like goodbye Republic, goodbye Turkey. You know, the Turkish people have chosen this particular path, supporting a more, let's say, authoritarian, more this kind of the government. How would you explain that? You know, because it's pretty. It looks all very pessimistic to me.
See, I don't think Turkey is going anywhere. So no goodbye, no goodbyes. There are several reasons that I'm optimistic for the next couple of years. They're going to be tricky years. You know, it's not going to be easy. But there are a couple of facts that make me optimistic. One of the facts being, despite everything, right? So despite the campaign being so disproportionate, despite threats, and despite the fact that the Yes campaign used nationalistic rhetoric and religious rhetoric to sort of push people towards the Yes side, half of my country, half of the population said, no, I'm not going to play ball with you. And that's very encouraging, right? Half of the people, despite everything else, said that I'm not fine with this. I'm going to stick to my democratic values, and I'm going to make sure that this country at least remains, with respect to the regime, that we at least maintain a certain degree of checks and balances, and we're not fine with the system. So I trust that from this 50%, from this half of the country, new opinions, new visions, and new political movements will form. And this really makes me optimistic. The second bit is, when I look at the people that work for the No campaign, these are people that were not affiliated with politics before. You know, business people, you know, arts people, all of these people that were very, very distant from politics up until this day. Finally, they are realizing that, you know, if they don't take part in political processes, they won't have any power to influence the outcome, right? Now that they've worked in the No campaign, there's no going back for them anymore. They will be very, very active in Turkish politics in the future. They will be active citizens in one way, shape, or form, be it through the NGOs, be it through civil society politics and whatnot, but they will now become part of the processes which they were not part of before. And that gives me a lot of courage for the future as well. That gives me a lot of courage that, you know, despite the short-term risks of this outcome, I think going forward, this will add to the strength of the Turkish democracy.
And these results leave us with the ideas, which often picked up by the media, about the very divided country. And, you know, the communities which do not speak together to each other in some way. So really, what can be done with that? You know, I mean, we see that there are very high emotions on that, and the people who are supporting Erdogan, they're really supporting a lot of them.
Look, we have to acknowledge one fact, which is that President Erdogan has done a lot of good things for a huge number of people. And people appreciate this. Turkish society, from its traditions, from its culture, is a very appreciative society. We don't forget, and he's done a lot of good things for a lot of people. That doesn't mean that he's done a good job with respect to doing away with these divisions in the society, right? He hasn't done a good job in keeping us together as a society and really trying to work out the problems. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, and I think the rhetoric of the opposition helped to that as well, the entire political arguments and political discussions were always about us and them, we and you. And that hasn't helped anyone, right? It did help to sort of strengthen the camps, but it hasn't certainly helped the country. Now, how do we go forward from this? We, for the past 3 years, we've worked in this election monitoring organization. It's called Vote and Beyond. And we did something differently from the political parties. We told people, listen, let's come together and solve this one thing around the transparency of Turkish elections. But what we want you to do is completely forget about your political preferences and about your identities, right? We don't care who you are. We just want you to come and solve this thing with us. Now, what we've observed is two things. On the one hand, we did solve the transparency issue of the elections. On the other hand, we brought these people together that traditionally wouldn't have come together, right? They, as they were working on this project together, they started communicating, and they recognized that the differences between them are not as big as the political parties suggested, right? When all you hear, all you know about the other side is through the words of the politicians, you think that there's all these evil people that are completely different from you. Whereas if you start working with people, if you start working towards the same aim, and if you for a moment forget about these identities and the differences, you realize that you're one and the same people. And that's the only way that we can sort of bridge these social divisions. That's the only way that you can bring people together if you put them together in social environments, if you strengthen the communications. And these will, of course, be through the civil society. Right? The civil society needs to keep the door open for people to come together and for people to work on solutions together, irrespective of their identities. Once these organic relationships are there, if I know you as a person, I don't care what the president, I don't care what the head of the opposition party says about you. I know you as a person, so they're not going to be able to divide us once we establish those organic relationships.
With that, I say you goodbye. Thanks a lot for being with us. Please follow us on our social network. Go and search Hromadske International. There is always a lot more than the Sunday show, but also be our viewers as well.